So now that we have the search functionality set up on our back end, let's implement it on the front end. And I'm looking at the GraphQL.js file in my front end code. And the very first thing I'm going to do is here in my component did mount function, I'll modify this URL to be the one that exists in our new back end code. Okay, so that change is done. Now the next thing I want to do is to come down here to the render function, and we'll put in a place where people can actually perform a search, where they can type in a search. So let's get an input in there. And we may as well use that nice input component we made a while ago. So input right there, and that should do the input for me. And I'll give it some blank lines. And the type here, well, the title, let's do the title first, is going to be equal to, in curly brackets, and then quotes, search. So that's my label. And the type will just be a text. And the name, I'll call it search. And the value will be equal to something we have to set up, this.state.searchTerm, which doesn't exist yet, but it will shortly. And we'll have to also put a handle change in there. Handle change will be equal to a function that we have to write called handle change. Okay, so that's our input. Now, up at the very top in our constructor, let's put in a search term. In our state, search term will default to an empty string. Okay, and I want to bind in my constructor this.handleChange, just like we did before, equals this.handleChange.bind and this. Okay, so that's the binding. Now let's create our handle change function. Handle change. And we'll use the arrow syntax. And of course, we're going to grab the value of the form field, and there's only one. Let value equal evt.target.value and set the state. This.setState. And again, just to be safe, previous state and the arrow function. And we're going to set search term to value. So there's our handle change set up right away. Now the next thing we want to do is we actually want, when something changes in our search box, we actually want to perform a search. So what we're going to do is create another function which we'll call perform search. And it's going to be remarkably similar to what we have here. So let's just grab the constant payload and copy that and modify it. So we're going to have a payload that we're posting to our back end. But it's not going to be list, it's going to be search. So let's change that to search. And it's going to take an argument. And in our back end, we call that argument title contains, like that. And its value will be equal to, and because I'm using a JavaScript template, I can do the double quotes and put $, and then a curly bracket, this.state.searchTerm. And close that. Okay, and what do we want to get back? Well, I'm going to get the ID, the title, the runtime, the year, the description. I can get other stuff as well, but that's sufficient for our purposes right now. So that gives me my payload. And now I want to do pretty much the same thing. So I'm going to copy the headers, the fetch statement. I'm going to copy all of this, then I'll modify it as necessary, just to save some typing. So back up in my perform search function, I'll hit return a couple of times and paste that in. Now, there is going to be one slight change here, and that is the final then clause. First of all, let's just do a console log the list. We have that. And now we'll put an if statement in here. So I'll cut this, and I'll say, if the list dot length is greater than 0, like that. And get rid of this because we don't need that. That's better. Then I'll paste that in there. Set the state of movies to the list, which is great. But if we have nothing, I'm actually going to say else, and I'll paste that in there, but I'll make the list equal to absolutely nothing, an empty array like that. And that way, if we're searching for something that doesn't exist, it won't leave values on the screen. Okay? So that gives us our fetch. Now, is there anything missing here? you'll notice the most important thing from our perspective is the payload, where on component did mount, which is right down here, we have list as what we want to do. But on this one, where we're searching, we have search plus a parameter, and the value of that parameter is actually grabbed from an input box. Okay, so there's that. So we have our perform search function. Now back up in our handle change, we actually want to perform that search. So we can just do it like this for right now, this.perform search. Okay, now let's make sure that everything compiled, and it did, and let's make sure our backend is running. And I'm going to stop it and start it just to be sure. So Control-C and run. It's running. So let's go back to our web browser and give this a try and see if we missed anything. So I'm in here. I will clear the console. We have our search box, so that's good. So let's look for the word the. And we have some errors. Can't convert undefined to object. So I must have missed something. Let's go back and have a look. And we'll go out of our back end and we'll go back to our front end and see what we missed. So it has to be in the perform search bit. Oh yes, data.data.list should be data.data.search, and we'll see why in a minute here, okay? Let's just say console.log JSON right here. Data, not JSON. And then down in the component did mount, we'll do exactly the same thing here. Console.log data. Okay, so let's go have a look at this now. We'll go back, we'll clear the console, and I'll reload this page. And you see that we have this back here. We have object data. Now let's look at the network. And I'll clear this and try this one more time. Reload the screen. So, first of all, I have this, and it gave me a response. This one here. And it gave me a response. So my request was list everything, give me the ID, the title, the runtime, the year, and the description. Now this was sent to the back end on component did mount. And the response we got was actually like this. Let's go to raw. We got a wrapper, our two curly brackets to wrap the whole thing, then data, then list. Okay? Now, if I go search for something, let's say I search for the, now it's calling that using our perform search function. And it is curly brackets, data, search, not list. So back in our code, here, and this function is component did mount, I'm looking for data.data.list. And on perform search, I'm looking for data.data.search. And that actually worked. So we go back and look at our web browser again. When I look for the, I see Dark Knight. But if I get rid of this and put in, say, Shaw, it gives me the Shawshank Redemption. And when I back up and type dark, it gives me the Dark Knight. So it works, and it works really, really well. Now, obviously, that's not a full implementation, and there are things that could be done to simplify this, but this should give you a clear indication as to how useful GraphQL can be. Now, some people love it, some people don't like it. It certainly requires more work to set up on the back end, but it also gives people working on the front end far more freedom to construct the kinds of queries that they want and get exactly the kind of response that they want with no extra data whatsoever. So, there you go. Time to move on.